Hello and welcome. My name is Liz Ndoye, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Art at Home, a series of classes sponsored by the Hoboken Public Library. As with all the sessions that we've had prior to this, I'm going to begin this evening's talk and lesson with a discussion of a particular artist. After we look at her work and talk a little bit about her life and career, I will then demonstrate for you a project that you can do yourself at home during this time of pandemic. And I've said it before, but it's worth repeating. The arts are the best way to relieve your mind of stress and any anxiety you may be feeling during this very unusual period of history that we're all living through. So, to begin with, let me introduce our artist for this class. Her name is Susan Rothenberg, and she is no longer alive, unfortunately. She passed away quite recently, but I just really discovered her a year ago, even though she has been very active in the American art scene for many, many years. Rothenberg was born January 20th, 1945, and she died May 18th, 2020. She was an American contemporary painter, printmaker, and sculptor, and draftswoman. She achieved a place of prominence through her iconic images of horses, believe it or not. She synthesized the opposing forces of abstraction and representation, and she really launched a whole new branch of abstract expressionism in which she reintroduced parts of the human and animal figures. And at the time of her practice, this was really kind of an unheard of thing. Abstract painters were eliminating shape and form that had any recognizable meaning to it. But Susan Rothenberg brought all that back to abstract work. And when you see the images that she created, you're going to be really amazed at how these figures, the shapes of horses and other things in nature that she painted, really work within an abstract painting. They're quite wonderful. She was born in Buffalo, New York. She was the daughter of Adele Cohen, a president of the Buffalo Red Cross, and Leonard Rothenberg, who owned a supermarket chain. She had a middle-class life. In 1965, she graduated from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. In 1967, she went to Washington, D.C., and studied at George Washington University and the Corcoran Museum School. In 1969, she moved to New York, where she became a member of a dedicated community of artists, and then through large acrylic paintings, she featured emblematic life-sized images of horses. Largely monochromatic, she did not use a great deal of color. She established her reputation in the New York art world in the early 1970s. Now we'll look at some paintings by Rothenberg. You can see how monochromatic her work tends to be. This painting has very little color in it. There's a bit of pinkish color here, but it's primarily black, white, and gray. So obviously it's a horse, and her horse paintings are what gained her fame. You can see that she is very painterly in her approach. You can see the brush strokes. It appears as if the work is very quick and messy, but in fact Rothenberg spent days, weeks working on each image that she made. She frequently scraped things off and then repainted, scraped it off again and then painted on top of it again. She always had an idea in mind of what she wanted to accomplish. So she was very demanding of herself, very exacting in her work. I absolutely love the way the figure of the horse dominates the composition of the plane of this painting. There's really some magnificent negative space. And just to recap, the negative space is the space that is not the image. It is the space surrounding or cut out inside the shape that the artist is making. So very powerful the way she laid the horse's body all the way across the entire image. Very, very strong, powerful composition. And from the mid-1970s on, Rothenberg was recognized as one of the most innovative and independent artists of her period of contemporary art. During an era when minimalism was at the forefront of the New York art scene, she stood out because of her reintroduction of expression and figuration. Her work has a great deal of emotional content to it. In fact, Rothenberg often said if she didn't get emotional feeling or a sense of how she felt when she thought about this image into her work, she was very disappointed with the painting and would in fact reject it. So the emotional expression content in her work was extremely important to her. In this painting, again, there's very little color and so many wonderful compositional devices to talk about that make this painting very powerful. I hope you can see the triangle that she has placed in the middle of the flat plane of the picture. And inside the triangle, she's placed this really simplified profile of a horse in motion. And it just makes for some of the most beautiful shapes. For example, this negative shape here beneath the horse's belly and between its foreleg and hind leg. This shape here underneath the horse's rump. This shape along the back of the horse, which really emphasizes the kind of hard-edged, jagged shape of the horse itself. Just wonderful genius work here. Rothenberg's horse figures of the 70s contain some degree of minimalism because of their repetitive qualities. Her hectic yet loose rendering of the figures blended the earlier conventions of abstract expressionism and color field painting. And by the early 1980s, she was focusing on disembodied heads and body parts. By the end of the decade, she was painting complex and symbolic figurative works full of more color and movement. Here's a prime example of her 80s work. You can see the disembodied heads of the horses in the upper part of the image. And then down here at the bottom, there's another horse's head and neck. And in between, joining all of these heads together, there are fuller figures of horses. Here there are two horses in motion. Here's a horse laying on its back. Don't see that too often. Really, really interesting composition. For me, my eye starts here in the upper right and moves across here and then back up on the left-hand side. Again, you can see her expressionistic technique. Very, very thick impasto of paint with a lot of brush strokes showing. So again, she's blending minimalism with abstract expressionism, and she was the first artist to do this. After moving to a ranch near Gallisto, New Mexico, her paintings reflected life in the southwestern United States and became suffused with color. And there's a lot more color in this painting. Beginning in the 1990s, she used the memory of observed and experienced events, a riding accident, a near-fatal bee sting, and other events as the inspiration for her subjects, and adopted oil paint. She stopped using acrylics and started with oil paint as her favored medium. As in her earlier works, these paintings are distinguished by thickly layered impasto with energetic brushwork, and they exhibit her interest in exploring the relationship between images and surface. This work is definitely from her later period. We're really losing a sense of the representational quality of her earlier work. It's really difficult to tell what this image is at all. The color is exquisite to me, however. That green is jewel-like in quality. At this point, in 2010, the New York Times art critic David Belcher wrote that comparisons between Rothenberg and Georgia O'Keeffe had become hard to avoid. And from her early years in Soho through her move to New Mexico's desert landscape, Rothenberg remained as influenced and challenged by her physical surroundings as she was by artistic issues and personal experiences. In addition to her earliest horse paintings, Rothenberg took on numerous forms as subject matter, such as dancing figures, heads and bodies, animals, and atmospheric landscapes. Rothenberg's visceral canvases have continued to evolve as she explores the boundary between figural representation and abstraction. Her work also examined the role of color and light. You can really see that in this painting. And the translation of her personal experience to a painterly surface. Again, very abstract, very painterly. You can see those brush strokes. You can see that the paint is layered on very thickly, and yet it is a bird. You can see the head of the bird here, the leg and feet. Here's another leg over here, and this is the back wings, or the back of the bird with the wings folded over the back. Really gorgeous, rich, saturated color now. She's completely moved away from her earlier monochromatic works, and this to me is starting to have even more emotional power than the earlier pieces had, and I believe that's because of the deep colors that she started using later in her career. Although best known as a painter, Rothenberg also made crucial contributions to the medium of drawing. On the occasion of her 2004 exhibition of drawings at Sperone Westwater, Robert Storr wrote, Fundamentally, drawing is as much a matter of evocation as it is of depiction, of identifying the primary qualities of things in the world and transposing them without a loss of quiddity. This, at any rate, is what drawing has been for Rothenberg. So her work has been the subject of solo exhibitions throughout the United States and abroad. Her first major survey was at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. She also showed at the Museum of Modern Art, the Carnegie Institute, and the Tate Gallery in London. More recent exhibitions of her work included a retrospective at the Albert Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, and a retrospective at the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in Monterrey, Mexico, and a survey of prints and drawings at the Herbert F. Johnson Museum of Art, Cornell University. She also had a solo show, Susan Rothenberg, Paintings from the 90s at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and her work, Butterfly, painted in 1976, was displayed in the Treaty Room of the White House during the Obama administration. She was the recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship Grant, the Cornell University Alumni Award, and the Skowhegan Medal for Painting, and Sweden's Rolf Schack Prize in 2003. She was married to sculptor George Trakas from 1971 to 1979. The couple have a daughter, Maggie. She then married the artist Bruce Nauman in 1989. Her relationship with Nauman, another prominent artist, has prompted more associations with Georgia O'Keeffe because of her relationship with Alfred Stieglitz. Rothenberg died at her home in Galisteo, New Mexico, on May 18, 2020, at age 75. So we're now going to briefly look at a picture of a color wheel, and I'm going to do a little recap and intro for those of you who've never seen a color wheel before about color mixing, and then we are going to create a painting inspired by the style of Susan Rothenberg's wonderful work. So this is a picture of a color wheel. A color wheel is a useful tool for artists, whether you're an advanced artist or just starting out. The color wheel helps you to remember the different techniques for mixing colors. To start with, there are three primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. Then there are secondary colors. The secondary colors are created by mixing the primaries together. The two primary colors, yellow and red, create orange. When you mix the primary blue with red, you make violet. And finally, when you mix the primary yellow with blue, you get the secondary color green. Artists tend to think of the colors in the red-yellow family as warm, and colors in the blue-green-violet family as cool. You can mix primary colors with their secondary opposite to start creating other colors that we call neutral or earth tones, and I'm going to be demonstrating that for you in our lesson tonight. You can also create tertiary colors. So for example, you can get different shades of orange by mixing more yellow than red, and you can get a yellow-orange, or by mixing more red with the orange to create a red-orange. And that's basically all you need to know about color mixing. I'm going to talk to you now about the materials that you'll need for our project tonight. We are going to make an abstract painting, but a little bit representational, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But first, the materials that you'll need. I'm using acrylic paint. I prefer using acrylic paint when I'm working in enclosed spaces. Oil paint has a very powerful smell. If you have oil paints available to use, go ahead and do it, because oils are wonderful to work with. You'll need brushes of varying size. You'll need water to wash your brushes with. I have a container of water here. And finally, your palette. I am only using the 3 primary colors for this project, and white and black. I want you to challenge yourself with this painting to try and only use this limited palette, because it really forces you to mix and experiment to create the colors that you want to use. Now I'm going to show you how to mix and paint. I started this painting earlier. Notice that I have made a representational form, and that's what I want you to do initially in your piece. Think of a shape or form that represents something for you. For those of you who know me and who've sat in on my classes before, you know that I frequently draw this kind of humanoid shape. It represents the doll sculptures that I make in my own professional practice. But you could think of an animal like Susan Rothenberg did that you love. It could be a bird shape that you use, or if you're lucky enough to have a pet, you could draw the form or shape of your pet. I started first with a light pencil drawing, and then I did what artists call a wash to fill in the background, the foreground, and the forms themselves. You'll notice that my painting at this point is kind of duller colors, and that I did intentionally because I only use colors that I mixed. I did not use colors right from the jar. And I want you to try and do this with this project as well yourself, because it is the only way you will learn how to mix colors. Mixing colors is so much fun. It really is a form of experimentation. A good way to help you relax when you're mixing colors is to think that you're a scientist now and not an artist. You're trying to figure out how to make the color that you need. So if you watch me, I'm going to show you how to make brown. This is a color that is frequently needed, and people often ask me, well, how can I mix brown if I don't have it? It's really easy. I'm going to start with yellow. And if you recall from the color wheel, yellow with blue makes green. Now it's counterintuitive, but if you take the primary opposite of green on the color wheel, the primary opposite of the secondary color green is red, and mix it with green, voila! You are going to get a color in the brown family. And I want to make the brown on my doll figure a little bit darker. So, at the moment this is a little too red. I'm not going to panic about that. I just need to create some more green to add to the brown. And remember, in the style of Rothenberg, you want to keep the paint thick, heavy, and you want the brush strokes to be visible. Don't smooth out your paint. So this is a little bit too violet for me at the moment. And the way to get rid of that is to add a little bit more yellow. Yellow and violet are opposite on the color wheel. And they will make, when you combine them, they will make earth tones. Another tip, if you want to achieve an image in the style of Rothenberg, you want your forms, your shapes to be very simple, and you want them to be large. You want them to fill up your composition, to make for that dynamic abstraction that she created. Now, I also put a little bit of white and black on my palette. I'm going to very judiciously add a teeny bit of black to my brown. I want the outer edges of my figure to be darker. Gives it a little bit of volume. Be careful when using black and white. I don't mean to inhibit you by saying that, but black is such a powerful color. You want to use just a tiny bit at a time so that it doesn't overwhelm the image you're trying to create. You can always add more as you go. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white. And it's becoming a little bit too lavender for me. So I'm going to try and add a little yellow. And a little red. And now a little more blue. Yellow to get rid of the red tone, and that's going to be for the smaller figure in the corner here. Cleaning my brush, because now I'm going to work on the background. Foreground and the background. First I'll work on the foreground. Again, I'm only using colors that I mixed. Nothing that's straight out of the bottle. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time during this lesson to show you the completed work, but in a moment I'm going to return this painting to the easel so you can see the direction in which I'm headed. And I think that that's going to be enough to launch you into doing your own painting. And the beauty of Rothenberg's technique and process is you can always let it dry and paint over areas that you're dissatisfied with, or you can rub away or scrape away what you don't like when it's still wet. I'm going to work a little bit more on the background, and then I will hang this up for you to see. And hopefully it will inspire you to do your own work. And don't get paint on your table. Again, you want the brush strokes to show. Particularly in this second part of the process, you want to start laying the paint on thickly and getting that wonderful texture in the piece. All right, there's a lot more I have to do on this. That's what I love about doing art. You can put it aside, you can come back to it at a later time, but let's hang this up so you can see the direction that this painting is headed in. Again, mixed colors only. You can get these warm, earthy tones. Let your form be large to fill up the whole space, and you can start creating your own painting in the style of Susan Rothenberg. Do one thin layer first, let it dry, come back and start putting thicker layers on top. And we've come to the end of our lesson. I want to again So in closing, I want to thank the Hoboken Public Library again for sponsoring our Art at Home lessons. I hope you enjoyed learning about Susan Rothenberg and color mixing during this class. Please do experiment with color mixing. It really is a great way to exercise your mind and your creativity. And art on. Have fun with it. Visit the Hoboken Public Library website at hobokenlibrary.org for this class and all the previous Art at Home lessons. Enjoy yourself, and I will see you next week.